welcome, Peter. Thanks very much for doing this.
Thank you.
Tell us about the origins of this recording. It goes back quite a number of years.
Yeah, the Prospectus I. It started in 1992. I have just released my first official tape on the Colmit Industries subsidiary label Sound Source. And I was like looking for a little bit new sound, new direction, and pretty much start with what I had at the time, the equipment I used for this tape release, and went on exploring more industrial elements, maybe. Those who recall this first tape, Après nous le déluge, may remember it was kind of rhythmic and a little bit melodic, perhaps. But now I wanted to make more industrial album, and experiment with the sampler, which was kind of new for me, the sampler instruments. What I did first was record a lot of documentaries from television, and I stole the sounds from these documentaries, but just parts of, because you could only sample like 1 second at a time. Then you can stretch the sound like maybe 5 seconds, but it was the quality of the sound went like from being 1 second pretty good quality to 5 second very bad quality. So it's made up of very bad quality sounds, really. But it's got its charm somehow to make that, and mix it together with other kind of instruments, like kind of cheap synthesizer sounds.
But I think it's a great example of how, in those days, the limitations of the technology helped to create the way that particular subgenre would come to sound. So the way that your samples were used, we heard over and over again in the years that followed.
Yeah, I mean, now we work with technology that is kind of, you can do whatever you want, and the quality is top notch. It doesn't matter if you work with 1 second or 5 hours. And there are so much possibilities. It's like never ending. So it's good to use these like limitations sometimes. I do it today even, just to make it okay, I don't want to have these enormous possibilities.
It's been described as a benchmark of dark ambient. I'm curious what you were listening to at the time, and what informed this new direction for you.
Basically in the 80s, much of my music taste was formed in the 80s. I listened very much to, thanks to my bigger brother, who was buying records, and I consider the same records being mine as well, because we share, because we lived in a family. But I listened very early on industrial music like SPK and Coil, the Smart, of course. That's what I've been like nursed with in the 80s. But somehow I think it's just elements of, like, from Coil. I love how Coil did their music in the early 80s, but not how they did the music in the 90s. So I took the fragments, of course, from the 80s period, and Also Delirium, early Delirium, the Frontline Assembly side project was really something I listened to in the very late 80s, early 90s, which was part of the raison d'etre sound, actually. That You Can Dance was a huge influence. And I mentioned Lose More Than SPK when they before they did a more synth pop last album. Yes, even Brian Eno, like if you listen to his ambient works, it's really very interesting, and that's maybe not inspired me for the raison d'etre project, but for some of my other side projects, really, which I had also had at the same time. So
yeah, so we're talking about 1992, and
yeah,
this extraordinary period when the influences of the names that you've shared, but also you've got Neubauten, you've got Test Department,
yeah,
really serious sounds, but coming together with the Eno ambient thing, and it's such a productive, fruitful period of music, just so much extraordinary music, and in part, as you say, enabled by this technology that was so much more affordable at the time. It must have felt a little bit like, endless possibilities for you.
Yeah, it was incredible. I mean, what I started to make music on my own in 1988 and had this very, very cheap keyboard with a little synthesizer function. It was great to tune in the sounds with this synthesizer function to make really weird sounds, but it was like just a cheap keyboard. And then I had nothing to record with except for my tape recorder, 2-channel and even no cable in between, just a built-in microphone. Suddenly I just bought another tape machine so I could attach cables in between. It was like, wow, much better. And I even like the old tape machine. I'm much into technology and stuff. I want to see how things work, so I can sometimes just open the tape machine, see what's in there, put it together. Maybe it didn't work really as expected again. Like, okay, now it goes like half the speed. Oh, but it's great because that makes the music sounds for me maybe better. So it's been experimental stages all the time. Every time you buy new equipment, it's like, wow, I had to deep dive into this equipment and see what it can do, explore the possibilities of that little machine.
And this is what really drew me to the project, because you have, as I understand it, you've re-recorded a lot of material. Tell us about how this compares to the original.
I have saved everything from 1992, 93. I have the tapes, which I first sampled the sounds for the album, and I have notes for every single track. There are like, oh, this is the song, this is the tapes I've sampled from. So what I did now is just to resample everything, to start from the source, to find the original sound. Because in as I told you before, I had this old bad equipment, a sampler, very cheap. I used something called the sampler was an Akai X7000. It got special disc floppy disks called quick disk, I think, which was kind of impossible to find. It was an obsolete machine, or and it was, if you found this discs, it was like very expensive. and you could save only 1 or 2 sounds on this discs. So what I did was for every session, for every new track, for every retake of the track, so to speak, every mixing session, I had to resample everything. Already, I did it every day. I mean, in my home studio, like in 1992, 93, because I couldn't save it digitally. It was just analog process to sample from the tape all the time. But so that's why I had to keep notes of everything. What tape number, what side, what the counter, where is the sound on this tape, and how where did I loop the sound, such things. So to resample everything 30 years later, it's a process that's okay. When I did it in 92, maybe I remembered everything in my head as well. It was very easy, but it's not as easy to do it 30 years later.
I can only
yeah, even if you have the notes. And now I have much better equipment. So when I transpose the sounds, like how many semitones, like 36 semitones, maybe, it sounds completely different. So I have to degrade the sounds as well now.
just to make it maintain the original feel.
Yeah, but every sampler is different. So actually the best would have been to buy a secondhand Akai X7000 to make it really good, to make it exactly the same. But I wanted to make it a little bit more fresh as well. I wanted to use the new technology to give it a more high fidelity sound, as I would be in the same I mean, I can't go back 30 years to make the same album. I have to refresh it somehow, to use as much dynamic as possible from this very flat sounds, actually. So
this is the second time the recording has been re-released. There was a 2013 final edition.
Yeah.
Curious, two questions here.
Yeah.
Why do you keep going back to this? And why do you think there is such sustained interest from lovers of your work in this particular?
Why I go back? Because I was never happy with the result in 1993. It was recorded in a real studio, but it was not a good studio. It was like tiny speakers. It's, I mean, a PC speaker would be great to have, but much better than the studio speakers in that studio. I mean, it was like the same size. I would like to do it in, I know it was because I use a lot of low frequency sound. The speakers in that studio couldn't reproduce that sound. So I know Roger Karmanik from Colmit Industry. He just called me the first mixing day after first mixing day to this sounds completely weird at home. It's too much low frequency. It's just rumbling. We had to compensate because we didn't hear anything. We had to overcompensate with the low frequency stuff. So it was overloaded. So it was kind of mixed in like blindfolded, because we didn't have the monitors. But it went good in the end, but I was never happy. So that's why I had done not only one, actually 4 remixes of this album.
No kidding.
The first 2 was made like in 1995, 1997. And they are like, I don't like them. And then I did one in 2012. it got, in my opinion, it got a little bit better, but I couldn't really reproduce the sounds. It was kind of some crucial sounds that I couldn't really recreate, despite I had all the samples, the source tapes, the notes. So it was like, why? So, and it took some while before it must be because of the equipment. It's not, I have too good equipment, and I didn't really try that much. I could do some other, what to say, I could sample directly from the original CD release sometimes, which I didn't do. But now, later on, this last, hopefully the last, I guess it's the last rework, remix, redux, I call it, when I go back to the original source. Some sounds were still a problem, but so I got back to the original CD release and sampled directly from that one. And nowadays it's possible to, if you have more sounds simultaneously, you can isolate some sounds. So it was possible for me to, even if the sound wasn't clean, it was some other sounds at the same time. It was possible to isolate the particular sound I wanted from the other, just to remove the other unnecessary sounds. So I could use the material from the original CD sometimes, just some tiny samples. But anyway, it makes a difference in the end. But also I did not only, I did mix it with the resampled directly from the source sound, the new sound with the old sound, and it become a little bit different, but better. It got more dynamic, so to speak. It got, instead of having this only original very flat sound, I got a little bit more depth in the sound with the new resampled sound.
Despite all of this, your strive for perfection.
Yeah.
People have loved this record for 30 years.
Yeah, I know.
What is it about this recordings
yeah,
continues to resonate with people?
I don't know really. I mean, that's almost a question for the listeners, I guess. But for me, it's not the first official release for me. It's the second, but for me, it's even it's almost the first, because it got to the CD. My first album on CD, and CD was something new, and it was like, okay, instead of selling 300 copies, this becomes something that sold maybe 8,000 copies on CD or something like that. So it got, it just exploded with this album. And I think fans are from everywhere, from what you say, true industrial fans to black metal fans and everything, in between, whatever. It's I think I did something unique with combining all the influences I listened to at the time, and something new was created that are a little bit a new style, new direction for music, I guess.
You have a very extensive discography. You've been for many years, as we've discussed. Are there other recordings that you're inspired to go back to?
Obviously, my first 3 CD albums, they suffer from the same problem a little bit. So I always go back. for my second album, and Frau by the Wind of Loneliness, I've done a remix and a redux, and also for the third CD album, Within the Depths of Silence and Formations. And I will probably next year and the year after, I will do like the same as for this Prospectus I, a Sublime Edition of my first 3 CD albums. Not only to make a redux album, but the fact is that the original CDs has not been released since the date of when they were released the first time. They have never been re-released in the original format. So now with the very good tools for mastering, it's time to see them in new light with what mastering techniques can do.
Did you ever imagine back in the day that this music would still be relevant in 2020 something?
I never really had that perspective. For me, it would be, because personally, it would mean something. But for other people, well, no, I would say people would, as everything, they would, every new generation will look back somehow. So I think, yeah, it will be relevant for some people someday. That's and it will be continue for many decades, I guess.
Well, it's wonderful. It still sounds as fresh and exciting as it ever did. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.